Training. That's what we're, that's how we help people. That's how we make people ready to do their job. That's how we prepare them for critical situations. And I think a lot of times when people think of training, a mistake that we make is we think of formal training. We think of training where, okay, we're going to take the next 2 weeks or 2 days or 2 months and we're going to go through a formal process and we're not going to do any work because we're going to be training. And a lot of times that's what people think of when they think of training. And obviously I went through a lot of that type of training. Leif, you went through a lot of that type of training because you got a lot of that type of training shoved down your throat at the Naval Academy.
I definitely did.
And there's benefits for it. You kind of get, I would say, a foundation from that type of formal training. But to me, the most important type of training that happens is informal training that happens while you're doing your job. I guess the common term would be OJT, right? On the job training. And actually in the SEAL teams, on the job training was the way everything was trained. When I came in, like for the leadership, there was no leadership. The course that you ran, the junior officer training course, didn't exist. So the officers would just show up to the SEAL team. All they'd done is been through BUD/S like all the other guys. They had, and whatever college they went to. But from what I can assess, there's not a whole lot of leadership that actually gets absorbed in college. I mean, I've never had an officer say to me, "Oh, I went to this great class, and I'm thinking I'm going to do good on this assault because I took this leadership theory class." There is a disconnect, and I know that there's leadership classes, and I know the people that run those leadership classes at both those places, or at least I know some of them, and like they care deeply about training those guys up, which is awesome, and it's appreciated, and they're getting, like I said, they're getting that foundation, but then you've got to at some point connect the thread between what you learned in the class and what's happening when freaking mayhem breaks out. And it takes some time to make that connection. And that was cool about, like, when I was running TRADET, it was hard as hell, but you could, and you saw this when you went out there with me, especially when you were at Team 1 in a leadership position, you could watch the leaders get better. It wasn't like we were just kicking the shit out of them and like, oh, you just suck. No, you could watch them learn the techniques, learn the principles, and start to be able to actually lead no matter what we did to them. And the another interesting from their viewpoint, a lot of times, it would seem like sometimes that they might think that we were just kicking the shit out of them every time. But what they didn't realize until we tell them is like, no, the first operation that you went on, we didn't even do anything. There was no opposing force. All you had to do was go out there, and it seemed so crazy. And then the next one, we had one shooter that caused all this chaos and mayhem. The next one, we had 2 shooters. The next one, we had 5. By the last iteration, we had 7 or 8 guys out there, and you guys completely dominated, and there was nothing we could do. There's nothing that the bad guys could do to beat you. To them, a lot of times, it just felt like they were just barely, they're just barely keeping their head above water. But then you'd throw them back into an occasion. We do this, if there was a platoon or a task unit or a troop that was sort of starting to maybe get their confidence shook to a point where it's going to be a problem, we would back off a little bit and let them go out there and really knock one out of the park and be like, oh yeah, I got this. And then they'd go, they'd realize that we hadn't done as much to them, and they realized that they were getting better. So it's not that when you're in a leadership position, your goal is not to just kick the shit out of people and make them fall apart. That's not the goal. In fact, the goal is to make them like uncomfortable and maybe they just don't get there. For example, if it's a run time, right? You want them to just barely pass the run. And actually, sometimes you want them to just barely fail the run. You want them, if they got to run it in 32 minutes, you want them to get a 32:03. So they know, like, okay, I got to run as fast as I can. Next time, you want them to get a 28, whatever, 20 or 31:52. So, and then what do? You tighten the parameters. That's what happens in SEAL training. First phase, you got to do it in 32 minutes, the 4-mile timed run. Second phase, you got to do it in 30 minutes. Third phase, you got to do it in 28 minutes. So that's what we would do. We would continually ramp up the pressure. And actually, the way I explained it to the TRADET guys and to the troops too, I'd say we are going to compress the space-time continuum, because If you're a platoon commander and I give you one problem now, and then 45 minutes later I give you another problem in a different location on the battlefield, and then 45 minutes after that I give you one more problem, so you had 3 problems, and you would address those problems and solve them. It probably wouldn't be that hard for you. You're a new platoon commander. Then the next night, I would press the time and compress the space. So maybe you'd get one, and then as that one's getting wrapped up, I'd give you another one. And then as that one's getting wrapped up, I give you another one. And so now you could start to feel it. You could see it so clear. We'd compress that time-space continuum. And then guess what? By day 5, day 6 of field training exercise, it's 7 problems, and they're all happening at the same time in the same space. And so what people need to learn how to do is they need to learn to parse those problems out. This is called prioritize and execute, by the way. They need to figure out how to figure out what those problems are, pull them apart, and then address them separately. And then they'll be able to accomplish that. And the strange thing is, that's a skill. And it's a skill that you can learn. And once you learn that skill, you can get really proficient at it. And then 7 problems all at the same time, what it feels like 7 problems. You separate them in your mind in time and space, and you're okay. And that's what our goal was. So we got to see this. And the thing about the informal training, so when you and I went through training together, our workup, the amount of instruction that you got from the cadre was probably very small. Now look, did they give you tactical instruction about, hey, Leif, put your sight picture over here, or hey, you might want to put this gear over here, or hey, when you enter the room, think about this? Like, they definitely, and that's what the cadre was doing. But the vast majority of the training was informal training from me, from Tony, from guys that were like, hey, we've been doing this for a long time. Like, I had a very lucky situation where I've been doing this for 15 years, and you'd been doing it for 2. So for me to say, hey, what were you thinking about in that scenario? And you're like, I was thinking about kicking their ass. I'm like, Leif, I love the fact that you want to kick their ass. But you got 16 guys in the platoon. All 16 of them, if all 16 of them are thinking about kicking their ass, and no one's thinking about where you're going to go when you get done kicking their ass, you'd be like, got it. And it's so obvious. And all you had to do is just take a step back, and next thing you know, you're moving forward. So that informal training is what people can do all the time. And it doesn't matter what your business is. If you're a police officer, if you're a firefighter, if you're a salesperson, if you're a construction business, if you're a manufacturing business, it doesn't matter. What you can do is you can utilize what's happening in your business, what's happening in your world, to actually train people. And if you do this, it takes a little bit of investment. It's a little bit of investment. So if Leif, if you're a project manager on this construction site and you just showing up here, sure, I can say, okay, Leif, here's the timeline that we're going to do. Well, here's the timeline we're going to follow. And you go, okay, thanks, boss. And you just start following the timeline. What did you learn from that? You didn't learn anything. But if I say, hey, Leif, here's the project, come up with a timeline. And now you actually have to think. And look, how good are you going to do? You just got out of college or whatever. You've never done it before. You're not going to do great. Maybe if it was a graded test, you probably get a 50 or a 40 because you saw some of it in school and you did that one internship. So maybe you get a 50%, maybe you get a 60%. But now you do it, and now I sit you down like, hey, concrete, you can't double it up like this. And by the way, if you order your wood here, you're not going to have it here in time. Lumber's got to get. And you go, okay, cool, got it. And you're taking notes. We do another project next time. You do the same thing again. Now you get an 85%. And so in a couple projects, instead of you just maintaining the level of knocking a 40, getting that 40, now you go 70, 90, and next thing you know, you're doing it, and very shortly you'll be doing it better than I can because you're there on the job, and I'm now managing and doing emails instead of doing timelines. So doing those kind of things, and as a leader in an organization, taking the opportunity to say, hey, go ahead and figure out how you want to. What's the sales pitch you're going to use? What are you going to do? Here, pitch me. Well, a little 7-minute role play if we're in the sales industry. So doing that and letting that happen and making those investments that is how you build a team. That's how you do it. If you don't do it, you're going to end up stuck in your position, wherever it is.